Today we're going to be putting together the Major Fitness Cobra AH1 combination leg press hack squat machine. It is going to arrive in 3 separate boxes. My boxes say LS1 on them. This is a pre-production model that I got before the actual release. I'm not sure what the production model is going to say on the outside, but the model number of the machine we're putting together is the Cobra AH1 leg press hack squat combination machine. The key to getting your assembly together quickly and smoothly is having the right tools and making sure you have all the right parts. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to unpack all 3 boxes, lay everything out where you can see it, and make sure that you have everything. In your owner's manual, you're going to have a list in the front of everything that's supposed to come with the unit, and you're going to want to make sure that you go through this list and ensure you have all the parts. The second piece that I'll recommend is each box has a packing list. Hang on to these because each part is going to be labeled by a letter or a number or a combination of those. And because the owner's manual or the instruction manual is going to be all visual with pictures, each individual part is going to be labeled with its letter or number. Some of these look very similar, so you're going to want to make sure you hang on to these so that you know which part is which. You can sometimes on these types of machines accidentally put the wrong thing in when you shouldn't have, and that's not something you want to do. So make sure you're hanging on to this and keep it with the contents of each box. You're also going to get some tools that come with. You're going to get some Allen keys and you're going to get a couple of wrenches. Now you're going to need more tools than these. If you can, I'm going to show you a good alternative to these Allen keys. These wrenches you're going to need, but I would also recommend that you're going to have a couple of crescent wrenches if you've got them. The longer handles of a crescent wrench are going to be a little bit easier to put things together. Some of these things can kind of be knuckle busters, so the more purchase you can get, the better. And then as far as making things quicker, I cannot recommend getting a socket wrench enough. Having a socket wrench, and you'll need a 14 millimeter and a 17 millimeter socket, just for speed of installation and assembly. These are going to be invaluable. Borrow one from a neighbor if you have to, but if you've got to put the whole thing together with just these 2 wrenches, it's not going to be a great time. So if you can get a socket wrench, and then I'm also going to recommend that you have T-handled Allen keys. Now these aren't a must. These are just something that I have. I put together fitness equipment for a living and review it, so I happen to have these. I love this because it gives you better purchase on the wrench. It's not trying to kind of get torque with this little tiny end. So these are nice. You can get these on Amazon. You can get these at your local hardware store, but I do like having these. For this particular installation, you're going to need a 6 millimeter, an 8 millimeter, and a 4 millimeter Allen key. A pair of gloves is always invaluable, and then you're also going to want a rubber mallet. Some of these pieces are going to slide together, and the parts that slide into each other have been powder coated, so it's going to be a really tight fit. Having a mallet to help those things go together is going to really make things easier for you. If you don't have a mallet, you can always use some of the cardboard that came with, wrap it with a towel and use a regular hammer, but a mallet's definitely going to be helpful. So let's get this installation going, and we're going to go ahead and get this put together, and we'll stop step by step and show you along the way. As you're going through this installation, it's going to say in the manual a bunch of times to not tighten all of the bolts right away. You're going to want to what's called hand tighten them. Now you're going to need to tighten them a little bit more than you can with your hand simply because there's nylon inserts in these nuts. But basically what you want to do is you want to snug up the bolts and the nuts to the point where they're still a little bit loose and not all the way tightened down. And the reason for that is you're going to tighten everything at the end of the installation. But with a machine this size, what's going to happen is as you build it and you get kind of up to the top portion of it and you're putting the cross members on and things like that, you want a little bit of play to make everything go together easier. If you crank everything down right away, which is tempting, I've seen a lot of people do that, what'll happen is you're going to get to a point where something's not going to be able to fit, or you're going to force stuff together and it's going to scratch things. So just pay attention to anything that has to do with the frame itself. Like I've got the bottom portion of the frame put together here. You want these bolts that hold the frame portion together to just be hand tightened. Now, if you're attaching like a weight horn or a handle or a trim piece, you can go ahead and tighten those down. The important parts to leave a little bit loose, and not a lot loose, but just a little bit loose, are the actual frame itself. So that's a tip that you're going to want to follow through the whole installation. Once you're done with the entire assembly, you're going to go back through, you're going to crank everything down nice and tight, and it'll get everything snugged up and real stable for you. And let's get on with the rest of the installation. As you're putting on these uprights, the part number for both this side and that side are the same part number, but they're actually different. This branding, this really nice branding right here on this Major Fitness label is only on one side of each one, and technically speaking, you're gonna want this on the outside. So as you put these on, just make sure that the Major Fitness branding is on the outside if you wanna see it. And if you don't wanna see it, you can put it on the inside, I guess, but I did put these on backwards at first and then had to take them off and put them back on, so I figured I'd let you guys know that there is actually a difference between these two pieces. When you get to the point where you're installing these cross members between the uprights, two things I want to point out. First of all, this is a great example of why you want to just hand tighten most things. As you're fitting these cross members between the uprights, if you've tightened these things down all the way, what's going to happen is you're going to have a real hard time getting these in and lined up with the holes so you can get the bolts through. Secondly is this part right here is called part H, and in the owner's manual or in the instruction manual, it doesn't show what orientation it goes to. There's two big holes in the back. Those need to point up, and you can't see that in the manual, so I wanted to point that out. Also, several of the parts have these little cutouts right here. There's no function to them, but if you want your machine to look as nice as possible, this one, for example, I could have put it this way, still had the holes facing that way, but then I'd have these little cutouts showing. And it's nice to point those down. There's a couple other pieces like that where you can just point those cutouts down and out of view. So there's a couple of tips for you. Make sure that part H, the holes are facing up. Make sure that you are not tightening everything down right away, or you're gonna have a hard time fitting things like part H in place. On step 6, there is a mistake in the directions. I want to make sure and point this out, otherwise you're going to spend 20 minutes trying to figure out like I just did. So here they're going to show to put part W at the top of these rails, and this is going to hold the safeties that go up and down. When you look at the box that contains part W, it's going to show you that there's only one part W, and it's going to indicate a part that has a sticker on it that says it's part U. Part X is actually what you want to do. So there's two part X's in here, and there are these little guys that there's two of these, the same, they're just straight tubes. So where it says to put W, you're actually going to put part X. Now I'm sure at some point down the road they'll fix these instructions and you're watching this video and go, hey, mine is right. But in case you get an early on production edition that has this error, on step 6 where it says to use part W, in the box that says it has W, you're actually going to use part X. So there's two of them. That's what you use. Hopefully that's clear. Sorry that I said it 15 times, but you want to make sure you put the right thing on, because otherwise, if you make a mistake along the way and you put the wrong thing on, you're going to have to disassemble the entire thing to get the part back off to put the right one in. So this part's a bit tricky, and it's not really described well in the manual. Here what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting the safety arms onto the uprights, and you're going to see in the manual, it's going to tell you to put these little tubes, one on each side. They're clearly marked right and left. They have a letter specifically as well, so this one V is going to go on the right side. What they don't show you in here is whether it goes this way or this way. So first key is you're going to want to make sure you put it on so that the little L part right here, that the vertical part is going down the outside of the machine. So as you put this on here, you want it to go up and then down this way. The next thing you're going to need to do is, these are going to come with these pre-installed springs and screws. You're going to need to undo this screw and take it out, and then you're going to need to put this on in the right orientation, put it up through the piece here, and before you put this screw back on, you're going to want to put the bolts through this little pass-through. And I'll show you why you do that in a second. So we've got this safety on, we've got this bracket on, and now we need to put this screw back in. And the reason you want to put this whole assembly on here first, and just like most other stuff, we're going to hand tighten these bolts. These aren't full, but what these are here for is to keep this from moving. You're then going to take this and you're going to be able to pull it down so that you can compress the spring in there, and then you can seat this bolt. So you're going to put this bolt in here, and you're going to have to keep it down. This is an area where two people would be helpful. If you pull it down enough, you're going to be able to hand tighten this almost all the way, and then once it gets almost all the way down, you're going to want to take your Allen key and screw it down. And this is one where you're going to need this because this is going to fit underneath. So I know I recommended some other Allen keys before, but this particular part, you're going to want to use the one that comes with. And once this is tightened down, and we can do that with it. Now you can go back in and tighten these bolts. So that's how to put these carriages on. The other side is the opposite. The big important thing is to make sure that this goes down like to the right, and on the left to the left, and that you put this whole assembly on with this on first before you try and put this back on. In step 8, you're assembling this carriage and then the guide rails. And in the manual, it shows to insert the silver guide rails into this big carriage right here, and then put the whole assembly onto the rack. I'm doing this by myself. I guess with 2 people that would work okay, but there's a much better and easier way I found to do it. So what I would recommend is you take this piece, make sure that your safeties are up. You don't want them to slide out or else this is gonna fall on you. But make sure that both safeties are up, and you can actually just hang this carriage right here. These silver guide rails, you're gonna insert through the rollers, but 2 things for you. Number 1, you wanna put the rubber stoppers on the bottom first, but once you get this in, what you're gonna be able to do is you're actually gonna be able to just lift it up, slide the guide rail through, and then let it fall right into place in the bottom where it's supposed to go. That is so much easier than trying to put the guide rails in, because these rollers work really well. It's really smooth. So what you don't want is you don't want to have these things sliding back and forth. It's much easier to do it this way. And then all you do is to put the second one in is you grab it by this, lift it up, put this through, and then now you can seat them both here in the bottom. And again, just make sure that these safeties are pulled in. If they pull out, this is all gonna fall. But that's a really easy way to put this portion of the assembly on versus the instructions, which I couldn't get that way to work. As you get to the end of the installation, or towards the end of the installation, you're gonna install this pad down here. And in the back of the pad, there's 4 recessed inserts, and you've gotta kind of crawl underneath in the dark, even if you've got a light, and try and thread these bolts through the back and find these inserts. And after determining that swearing at it doesn't work, what I realized was if you take the first bolt at one of the corners and push it through first, and then take the seat pad, and you can actually, there's room that you can actually feel, and you can hit that opening with that first bolt, and then get that threaded in a little bit. And once that first one is lined up, go to the opposite diagonal corner, and then you'll put the bolt through, and then you can just swing that pad around and you'll feel where the hole is, and you can get that one. Once that one's in, then the other 2 are no problem. It's that first one that's a real issue. So instead of putting the pad on first and trying to get all the holes lined up and then trying to get the bolt through the opening, try to put the bolt through first and then lower the pad and the opening onto the tip of the bolt, and then that will allow you to get this in much easier. Otherwise, this is gonna take forever. A couple of last points on the assembly of the Major Fitness AH1 leg press hack squat machine. Number 1, if you do happen to be missing parts, which I was missing 2 parts. I was missing a bracket for the weight bar, and I was missing the little pins that hold the band pegs in. Just reach out to Major Fitness. That's a big reason why I said the first thing you want to do is lay everything out. Neither of those pieces kept me from doing most of the installation, so I was able to get everything done except for 2 bolts, which was nice. And then Major had everything out. All the missing parts were out within just a couple of days. So they've had really good customer service so far every time I've dealt with them. They ship from, I think, 12 different US warehouses. So if you are missing something, just reach out. They'll take care of you. They'll get it right to you, and you'll be able to finish your installation. Lastly, make sure you go through and tighten all of the bolts that you left loose on this machine. It's important to leave them loose, as I've mentioned about 1,000,000 times during this video, but now that everything's together, it's time to go through and make sure everything's tightened down. You're gonna be putting a lot of weight on here. Leg presses, typically you do use a lot of weight on them, so make sure everything's tight, there's nothing loose, nothing wobbles, and just go through bolt by bolt, make sure everything's cranked down as tight as you can, and you'll be set to go. Once you do, this turns out to be a very stable machine. It's not going anywhere. It does have wheels that you can move it around. I would tell you it's pretty heavy even with the wheels, so just crank all those bolts down and you'll finish up the assembly, and now you can get on to enjoying the machine. Hope this video helped you out, and until the next video, I'm Tim with GymCrafter.